I guess everybody caught the election yesterday. And most of us were stunned by it. I guess everybody, I don't think anybody that's into politics at all was not stunned by it. And now everybody knows a little bit more about Alberta than they did 2 days ago, including me, and I grew up there, and I'm thinking, I don't know it at all anymore. That's the weirdest province. It was like the most right-wing province you could possibly have when I lived there. My father voted Soak Red, which was practically a fascist party. And, you know, most everybody that I knew was kind of like that. And, boy, times have changed. Anyhow, people are suddenly a lot more curious about Alberta, I think, than they were 2 days ago. So what a wonderful coincidence that this evening we are featuring Laurie D. Graham, a poet from Alberta, much of whose poetry is about the province, its country, its people, its past and its present. And I grabbed the chance to introduce Laurie myself because we both have ancestors who homesteaded in Alberta. So both of us grew up listening to stories of homesteading. My father was raised in a sod house on the prairie and then a log cabin in northern Alberta when the Dust Bowl chased him north in the 1930s. And Laurie's grandparents and great-grandparents were raised on homesteads out in the prairie, but west of central, in central Alberta, but near Saskatchewan. To me, Laurie's poems remind me so much of my childhood on the farm and my youth in the prairie city of Calgary. Just to get your mindset in the right direction, facing west. Here are a few words I called from her poems. Sapling, aspen. There's aspens here, but a lot in Alberta. Wheat fields, fescue. Anybody ever heard of fescue?
No.
Well, that's a wild grass. And my parents were always saying fescue and Timothy. Anyway, it's the first time I've heard that word for ages. Yeah, creek bottom, felled trees, sod. What a word, sod. Root cellar, under the sod. Tailings pond. That's like the industrial version of a root cellar. So, Wayne Gretzky Drive. Here's her bio. Laurie D. Graham was raised in Sherwood Park, Alberta, and now lives in London. Sherwood Park is near Edmonton. London, where she writes, reviews, teaches, and helps edit Brick magazine. Rove, her first book of poetry, was published by Regina's Hagios Press in 2013 and was shortlisted for the Gerald Lampert Memorial Award. Her second book of poetry is due out with McClellan and Stewart in 2016. Work from that forthcoming collection recently won the Puritan's Thomas Morton Memorial Prize, was shortlisted for the CBC Poetry Prize and ARC's Poem of the Year contest, and is forthcoming in Prairie Fire. Here are a couple of interesting things I culled from Kevin Heslop's interview with Laurie. Kevin Heslop. You continue to be an active member of the London poetry community. You'll be reading at Poetry London on Wednesday, April 22nd at Central Library, following Saturday, and at Mykonos in May. You've agreed to serve as one of 3 judges this year, along with Ola Nowalski and Ron Stewart, who's here, for the Alfred Point award in poetry. I wonder if you might share a few words about your impression of the London poetry community, about in your capacity as an editor for several literary journals cited as the finest in the country, the Canadian literary landscape, and a principal difference or two between what may be achieved through a public reading in contrast to the written word on paper. Laurie, hard to put in a few words. Regarding the literary community in London, it was so welcoming to me when I moved here in 2013, and that continues to be the case. Small but vigorous and dedicated is how I describe it. Thanks to us. I've found more support here than I could have anticipated. Secondly, I feel the same way about the Canadian literary landscape as I do about Canada itself. I am skeptical of the designation. I think literature is more local than that. Just like I think sovereignty and identity is more local than that. But I think there's a lot going on in the literary community in Canada, and things are dire and robust and cash-starved and invigorating and challenging and adversarial and ever-changing. And always the boundaries need to be pushed out. The voices we hear need to more accurately reflect our country and who's in it and the things they see and know. On reading to an audience versus having people read your work in a magazine or a book, these are two parts of a whole when it comes to poetry, or the type of poetry I make anyway. It needs to be both heard and read. So doing both just completes the circuit. The differences between the two are big, the most significant of which being that you can see or sense your audience's reaction to the work at a reading, whereas on the page your audience can read your work however they want. This modulation between active reading and passive listening has a potential to create significantly different understandings of the very same groupings of words, which I find not only fascinating but vital to the craft. Well, I went to Laurie's reading a couple weeks ago at the Poetry London reading series, and someone in the audience asked her what motivates her to write. She had a simple one-word answer: anger. How could I forget that? Kevin Heslop got into this in the interview. You mentioned that the colonial history of this place drives your work these days. I wonder if you'd be willing to expand on what it means to you to live in a colony, and how this understanding shapes the perspective of your work and daily thought. Laurie, that's a hard thing for me to express well in anything other than poetry. It hits on deep identity issues and ongoing justice, bigotry, violence. Injustice, bigotry, violence. The destructiveness of forcing a colonial statehood model onto societal structures that have existed here for tens of thousands of years is something that so many people are still in full-on denial about, and that propels the poetry for me. And so as I started to address in Rove, I come from homesteaders that farmed land on the last parts of the prairie that MacDonald ignored into submission so he could ship goods from Ontario by train by the CPR lines. And now I live in a place from which those goods originated, and that age of manufacturing seems over, as is the train largely. That trips me into poetry. What is all that violence for? Laurie D. Graham.
Thank you, Stan, for that introduction. Hello, everyone. I love that there's outside air in this room. That's great. I stand before you astounded. I don't quite know what happened yesterday with that election. It's quite big, quite significant for me and mine. I think of my mom especially. She, the PC party came into power in Alberta when she was 21 years old, and now she's 64, and that's huge. That's huge to me, and that's huge to her. And I was talking to her on the phone, and she was just skipping around her house, exclaiming, just sort of beside herself, that there's some sort of change happening at the provincial level. And so that's, I feel too, the interesting part is that I'm going to read poems to you from Roe, from this book that I happen to have a few copies with me today, if you want to see how the book turns out. I feel suddenly like I'm a bit dated. I'm going to start by reading, I'll start at the top of this book, the first 2 pages of which contain a bit of an ode to / lament for my province, my area on the prairies, Alberta, Saskatchewan a bit too. And all of a sudden, today, for the first time, perhaps the things that I'm saying in this poem don't quite apply. And so that's going to trip me out while I'm reading, and hopefully it does you too. And then I'm going to just sort of wander through this book a little bit. It's a long poem. It's a cycle of poems without titles, basically. So I'm just going to wander through various places. As Stan said, I come from homesteader stock, so we'll be there for a bit. We'll wander into a suburb. Some Cossacks will probably charge down a major Edmonton street, those sorts of things. So, how many of you have experience with the prairies, have been to Alberta, know that place? A lot of you. Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Okay. I would love to hear your thoughts on this crazy, crazy election that happened yesterday, and also on this book for that matter. Rome. Say cloverleaf, polyethylene. Say this parking lot slinks into marshland. Say it bristles into scrubland. Say this mall becomes a bonfire. You travel its plastic smoke. Say sky, fescue. Say Wasakachuk. Say la vérandrie in Henday. Say heart choke. Say ground break. Say garrison with gun barrel eyes. Say there's a fist yelling, "This is my apartment now," in a language you don't know. Say geno, matra, patricide, regicide and terracide and skyicide. Say sapling. Say child blood. Cry doctor. Say your piece, then get out. Say translate, please translate. Say coyote. Say smallpox. Say creek bottom. Look, Wasakachuk. Say big bear. Say frog lake. Fresh loam, buffalo hide, free land, thistle, aspen, sweat. Riel. Say Riel can govern in Michif. Say color. Say colorless eye. Say queen's portrait. Say here is mine. I bought it. Say settler. Claim poverty. Profess better and see the felled trees. Say brethren, bread and wagons. Say Spanish flu. Say rail yard. Sing the combustion engine. Say the singing of your name in the new air. Say virgin territory and believe it. Say the Lord's bounty. Say the wheat fields. Say the dust. Pick the rocks. Say canola and soybean. Thresh, thrush. Say the laundry on the line. Say the dank root cellar. Say the numbers. Tell the wheat board where to go. Say it fast like an auction and move to the city. Say minimum wage and grunt while you work. Say benefits and rig pig, derrick, oil sand, tailings pond, boom. Say busted skull. Say tuition fund and heritage fund. Say concrete scaffold, say it far from home. Say the length of your commute at the sound of the tone. Say Ralph Klein and spit in the dirt. Say sky dancer, say Zwicky. Say Alberta and Saskatchewan and switch the order. Say Wayne Gretzky Drive. Say it's 5-on-3 and he's on a breakaway. Scream it in the riot on Canada Day. Whisper it into your lager. Say it from the hollow of the couch. Say it while you piss in the alley. Hiss it into your lover's ear. Say it to your broker and his secretaries. Tell it to the lawyer, to the landlord, when the heat's turned off and the pipes freeze. Say it again to the food bank and again to the caseworker. Say Cloverleaf Highway, polyethylene grocery sack. Say fluorescent light bulbs will save the earth. Say there's a heart in the middle of it. Please tell me you can hear it. Say glut and democracy. Say it in absentia. Say your little heartbeat. Send it through the layers. Say it in the muck, in this marsh, in this bristling parking lot. Now this family living on homesteads around Angle Lake and Meadow, sitting around the table Saturdays before or after the dance, cigarettes and brown beer bottles, a family of ships run aground in the stiff grass. Now 2 dogs loping the acres surrounding, bought by the TransAlta linemen to keep the chickens safe and the colts. Bullet a streak across the hard brown after the coyote. Punch the killer, fear-eyed and big as a horse. Now the violent ribs of dogs drawn soft in childhood sleep, where Punch sits, Bullet sits, ears cocked at motion along the road, posing with the others, cigarettes and brown beer bottles, and the ability to laugh. Say they learned Ukrainian, these English dogs on land of Nahiawak. $10, 160 acres. A gift to my grandparents for obeying the rubric of farm. Now, in citied sleep, the sweepers sluicing the avenue after the music's turned off. Punch and Bullet corralling the young ones out of the bars and back to their capsizing suburbs. Say one was shot, mistaken by a neighbor for a coyote. The other found at the shore of the lake with his chest torn away. These dogs like ships, tracking such a great distance. 3 penciled names on a torn page in my mother's jewel box. Bolishi, Moatiski, Drogovic. Not sure where these are, but I'm from there, in part. Ukrainians clearing poplars from their 160 acres all winter, vowing never to utter those names again. The grass-green bed of the suburb in windshot of Refinery Row, the displace of airplane, greyhound, ship across, house across, field into town, the men all around hollering it to its destination. See the house peeking through bush rows at 2nd Street. 2 tight rooms the width of my grandfather's memory when the house was still on the homestead, gazing high and west and south over the swells. Watch the 12 horses pulling it to town. Might have been winter, but probably not, and old widows can't farm homesteads alone. See the bow of the window glass. Foundation sinking in the ebb of yard. The oldest thing I know besides the arrowheads. Or the small gold cross in my mother's jewel box. Baba stopping the school bus in a blizzard to clasp it around her scoured neck. See the barn on the homestead chipping gray and collapsing as you read this. And the house in town stooped under good new shingles and strong chimney. There's nothing to say what survives. The family round the table never talking about what they have to do to get the land working. The Saturday dances get told, the roving packs of musicians, the roving doctors, the young men on the threshing crews. Those three nice Indian brothers, what were their names? Saying Ketchamayish instead of Yakshamayish, how are you, to the women in town. Going to church, singing mass, the blessed bread, the tidied graves. Then oil is discovered and they rove away. 2 generations of farmers. The wars fought to have this right to vacate. See the branches of the suburbs blossom wild with bungalows. See the grass green, the oil refinery, the tight gray brickwork of a city shamed to forgetfulness. Big Bear, look, these brick lanes are the reason you were starved off. Wandering spirit, look, no place for a warrior but the streets and the penthouses. This is why you were hung. Look, there's no ground here. They've stretched the concrete flat. Look how big the houses in the valley. Look at this religion of parking lots. Look how they plant these crops all over. They won't tell us how much the oil wells spend. They show the paper flying from hands and pockets. And look how people beg on corners, bless the rot-gut whiskey. Look, they rove on air and water, gazing down the blinking planet. Look what they do to sleep inside. And remember how their soldiers kept on coming. Now Baba's memory of Cossacks, thundering west down White Avenue in Edmonton. Tough, bald heads and beards and stinking tunics and cocked rifles and the hooves casting wide circles and the horses crazed for being too much alive. On the bus bench, staring down the army and navy, chest full to bursting in the Cossack charge, I aim my mind's rifle at the patio dwellers, at the citizens holding fast to their corners, relying on the light's ability to change, who turn up their imperial noses, these Cossacks another abominable delay, a way to show the daily ease of their anger. And bless the trinket shops behind me, anonymous and mutable, leaning away from their squat brick limits towards the scent of Cossacks stirring garbage and dust, the flying tails of matted hair, the dangerous torsos, the swords clanging. Bless my mother, remembering Baba, remembering Cossacks like a bad wind. Wild, hippie, howling men, gazes haunted by want and possession. Baba frighted into stillness as a girl, not knowing what she'd do if she lifted one foot off the dirt road in their presence, and me not knowing if there was dirt or cement under her feet to begin with. These Cossacks bellowing with their swords or rifles aloft, crushing the pavement and the piping beneath, these dutiful, pissed-off citizens waiting at the crosswalks for a destroyed road, the tremors of impossible existence. One at the rear turning on the back of his horse and pointing his sword at me, his rifle at me. A heavy laugh bumping his spine through the curvature of horse, and I swear the earth curves in concert, the farthest reaches of Baba's old world. The quaking depth of his laugh, and he's blasting west, and my foot rises above the concrete 2 inches, 3, as the last of them charges toward the moneyed halls of learning, the museums of bone and shale. The Cossacks will destroy them. I know this is more than a memory of a mother's memory, of a great-grandmother's memory, of a world she stepped out of so neatly in my mind and into Canada. See this soil swallowed in thin, hard gulps in all the cities I've lived. Make this street a field edge. Look, the birthing crops are nameless. If it looks like foxtail, it's barley, she said. The wind gathering, the dirt crust waning, the chemical smell on the air. The mown miles, the refinery floating its garbage across my childhood sky, my mother picking rocks from the sky as a child, all the places she can go. See it recede, this field full of crop. Speak this epoch of weeds through concrete. Imagine waking halfway home. The sun jet straight, the grass jagged. Scar tissue, a child's drawing of the line splitting road from ditch. The split cheek, missing digits, your wheels along this road, just accidents. This road with its nervous skiffs of gravel. Quack grass, blanket flowers, stitching roots through its ditches. Barn swallows tethered to strings of startled grasshoppers. You could swear your tires were aimed at the fog of city lights on the horizon. You didn't have a prayer. All that wind migrating the topsoil in tangled threads, coyote jogging head down along the shoulder, steam huffing from his nostrils, and the barbed wire strung loose to keep the cattle out or in. Spread carcasses of trees from tornado seasons, all those rocks pilgriming back to the field, the same damn thing every year. Along this back road to where the grain elevator was, over land sliced into thinkable grids and made to work. See the split souls not knowing the earth's tongue, but plunging seeds into it anyway. The water oozing a map too deep to read. If you could swear on the ghost thuds of buffalo. If you could swear on the worms and societies of ants through these hard-packed onion layers. Swear on the high combines running numbers over the stubbled surface, and on the road as abacus, assuming something brief, your only choice this road, assuming something resembling prosperity. Thank you very much. And I will finish by reading I'll read just one of the newbies. I've got a new collection that's going to be coming out next year, and so I'm just spit shining all the poems right now. And here's one of them. The collection centers itself around the Northwest Rebellion. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Northwest Rebellion. I encourage you to go type it into the computer box when you get home. It involves a number of things, but mainly it involves Louis Riel's last push for Métis land rights. Wrapped up in that series of events, it happened in 1885, were some Cree bands' insistence that they have a better deal than they were getting. And what they were getting at the time was the reserve system. There were certain chiefs who were skeptical about that system and their people's ability to survive within it. So there were Métis events that culminated, and then Cree events that culminated sort of in concert to constitute what we now call the Northwest Rebellion, or more and more it's being called the Northwest Resistance these days. So if you hear that, that's what that means too. I went to a place called North Battleford, they're sort of twin cities on either side of a river in Saskatchewan. And it was the place where the largest mass hanging in Canada ever took place. It was 8 people, 8 Cree men, 6 of whom were involved in a thing called the Frog Lake Massacre, which some of you might have heard about before. And it basically, as part of these sort of events, this insistence that a better deal be struck between government and Cree, there was just sort of a day of spontaneous violence that took place, and 8 settlers died, and then 6 people were hanged in response to that, as well as 2 others who had committed other murders around the area at the time. So for a long time, the grave where the 6 hanged men were buried was unmarked, and so it's now got some monument to it, and it's a very interesting place. You can't get to it via a road. You have to sort of pretend that you're going into a campground and then sneak over the fence and go down into the river valley to get to this spot. And so I went there, and this poem happened. Tonight the clouds are tall. I should tell you what it's called. It's called Battleford Gravesite. It's got a wee epigraph at the front of it so far. We must vindicate the position of the white man. We must teach the Indians what law is. John A. MacDonald. Tonight the clouds are tall and turquoise. North Battleford along the motel strip. Pickup trucks darkly uniform, kitted out, wide, lined up in the parking lot. Dump trucks head to toe along the service road. You'll be talked to in your dream tonight. You'll learn how things are done here. You'll forget. There will be lightning, then the sun will push out like an egg, metallic and hard, before receding into redness. You won't sleep long. In the morning, the Battle River will sparkle nearly white, a color you recognize, but it's too much. Your eyes can't take that much brightness. Behind the fort site, behind the campsite, down in the valley overlooking ball fields, angled at the river away, the 8 bodies turned under grassland. Wandering spirit song to his wife, still unfinished underground. The saplings pushing, making cover, rocking themselves. Your camera, your hands, your mouth, your feet soft but for the dust clouds, though it rained last night. Or was that your dream? The 8 poles above the scrub line in your photo. Show some respect and keep your distance. Though with no paved route, no federal plaque, you don't know what respect is. The headstone, the gravel, the colony of raspberries thick within the chain link, penning in the burial site. The song to a wife. 3 cigarettes for the stone. The song mixed with earth, chanting, wailing. The wind above, the poplars shielding, the sun above, the poplars diffusing. The film canisters you thought you'd fill with dirt. The names you write on a receipt from Fort Battleford. Kape Pam Chakweo, Papa Mikisik, Manchus, Kitawa Kini, Napes, Apischaskus, all Mistahimasqua's men, plus 2 who killed Battleford settlers, Itka and Weywinich. Daily life in the fort recited by undergrads in period costume, telling you how they all crowded in here after they heard the Indians were moving off their reserves. A young man in a loose red uniform packing a cannon, soon to be replaced by an interpretive sign. When the line of built structures runs out, the impersonating ends. Signs scattered through the area, they suspect they did the hanging, though no one here knows exactly where they did the hanging, and the one sign you need to see most is not here. November 27th, 1885, 8 in the morning. Wandering spirit, round the sky, bad arrow, miserable man, iron body, little bear, crooked leg, and man without blood. The grass matted, the sun whitening. River gold in the eye, in the distance. Tonight you'll sing their names out the window of your motel room. You'll gape as the city gathers its pickups and particle board, its flagpoles and power lines, vacancy, no vacancy signals. Clouds like stories, as high as you can see, dark turquoise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurie Graham. And I just want to say that was an absolutely fascinating description of our history and a part of our country that many of us don't know about, but we do now because of the NDP. So we have a few minutes for questions. Does anyone have a question for Laurie? I have about 4 questions, but anybody before me? Okay, I'll start. The first question I have is, obviously the last poem was based on research, But before that, I was wondering when it was more, was it research or memory before that you were coming from? Here you go.
It was very much memory with Rove and story. That was sort of the basis of my research for that book, trying to remember, especially with that part about Cossacks charging through the main street of Edmonton. That was sort of an attempt for me to remember the oldest family memory I had, and trying to sort of cast back as far as I could, and that's where I landed. And so that was sort of the exercise I was giving myself a little bit for the book, is trying to remember all those stories and try to place them within myself and within the present, that sort of thing.
Another question. Okay, I have an, okay, yes, please.
Can you talk a little bit about the form of this book?
Sure.
How did you, I noticed the form's like pretty uniform, and how did you stumble into that? Was it difficult for you? And what exactly is it?
Pretty uniform, did you say?
Yeah.
Like the
Like two-line
right,
covers
right,
and long lines.
right.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, who are going to buy a copy of my book, the book takes place, or the book is, as I said, a long poem, but predominantly, almost exclusively, two-line stanzas throughout, couplets throughout the book, and that was a way for me to try to keep a handle on things. It was sort of the first purpose of using couplets. Having a very sort of strict form within this large book length thing made it palpable for me. That was the first thing. And then secondly, I kept finding myself wanting to spread the lines out as I was writing parts of this. A bunch of lines, one after the other, or one on top of the other, ended up feeling a bit too claustrophobic. So I ended up having the urge to stretch things out. And so I think that's how that ended. So it was a way to sort of keep control, and then it was a way to sort of stretch out within that sort of controlling or constraining form. Yeah, Ron.
So what did your editor think about that? And did you come away from your editor angry, or did you get along? Or
right.
How did that process work for you?
Well, the funny thing is that I resisted. I tried to resist that form for at various points, trying to make the thing look conventional. Trying to slap titles on the tops of things and have it be an understandable thing. And so Hagios Press, as well as my editor, a man named Harold Renish. He's a poet who lives in Vernon. He's really quite phenomenal as an editor and as a writer. They both saw what was going on, said this can't be the way it is. We've got to take the titles off. We've got to, and so they sort of intuited the very thing that I was trying to resist at the time, and so they were very helpful with that, because I was really sort of scared, and as I said, just trying to keep track of this giant 88-page behemoth. So it was a really good experience for me.
Well, this question will sort of go along with what you're just asking. The very beginning, when you said "say it" over and over and use that, can you talk about why you chose that? Yeah. As a structure. Yeah.
Yeah, it happened accidentally at first. I'll tell you how I wrote those first 2 pages. It was very strange and not like any other experience I've had with writing poems. I had a piece of paper sitting on my dining room table for about a month. And I would literally, in the middle of washing dishes, I'd go right down a line, be walking by and think of something else and write down another couple lines, and it just sort of accreted from there. And so that repetition ended up just happening. Just say this, say this, say this, as a list, sort of, at first. It ended up being a way to sort of, to put it in really simple terms, to get really intense. It ended up really intensifying the language, that repetition, I found anyways, when I was writing it. And it was a way to show how like these things that I'm thinking about are shaking the ground. So having that say ends up bringing that sort of energy to it that I had in my mind as I was writing the thing. But it ends up coming up quite a lot through that book, various sort of repetitions of look. I was using look for a page there that I was reading to you, and it happens in newer poems as well, so it seems to be a bit of a theme now for better or worse.
Any other questions? Okay, so what was the feeling you were trying to get with Say It? And I want to know about when you were interviewed by Kevin, you said that the thing that drives you is anger. So can you talk about maybe both of those? Maybe they go together.
Thanks. Right. And as soon as I said anger, I've thought of a whole bunch of different, perhaps better words to describe what drives the writing of the poetry. I forget your question.
What was was there an emotion behind the say it, and then the anger?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. As you probably heard, when I was reading that part, there was I have a couple of opinions about the way things have progressed over the past years in that place, and so that ended up being a driver. That repetition ends up sitting in a place where there is anger or lament or frustration, but also a deep appreciation and love at the same time. And so that, I don't know, that maybe that repetition is a function of all those things at once. But you'd be better judges than me on that one, I could say.
So what are you angry about?
Oh dear.
What are you angry
Okay,
about?
where do I start? Well, it's funny, like, as I was saying before, it's sort of changed as of literally today. Like, that's part of it. Just sort of, I read a thing a little while ago about how on your average day in Edmonton, the pollution is often worse than it is in Toronto. And I've noticed that there's this like brown cloud that exists over my home now that didn't exist there even 5 years ago. And so that part is a real source of frustration to me. There's environmental concerns that have not been addressed and need to be desperately. There's economic sort of issues tied up in oil extraction that need to be improved. And so rather than me going into poli-sci, which I tried to do and failed to do, I ended up writing poems about these things. It seems to be the language in which I can say this stuff the easiest. If I were to write a tirade essay, I don't know if the effect would be nearly what I was going for. So that's just a sampling of the sorts of things I'm angry about when I write, I guess.
Okay, thank you, Laurie. Thank you.